Hello, and welcome back to the Relationship School's Smart Couple Podcast. And welcome if you're new. I'm Jayson Gaddis, your host, and I'm on a mission to help people like you understand what it takes to succeed in a long-term relationship. That's my jam, all right? And I'm going to help the planet do that as well. Here at the Smart Couple Podcast, we like to inform and educate you and encourage you to train. Otherwise, under reactivity and under stress, you're going to default to childhood patterns and strategies that probably don't serve that well in terms of relationship success. Okay, so we examine a lot of tools, tricks, and hacks in order to be thriving and to feel met and seen and understood in a long-term relationship, and how to give that to other people. Occasionally, I do an interview that might sound tangential and unrelated, but on closer examination, it's completely related. So if you want to have thriving relationships in your life, we look at, well, where did that start? Your primary relationship started in your family of origin. And who had the biggest influence on you? Your parents. So I occasionally sprinkle in some parenting advice. And in this episode in particular, I found a parenting expert, someone who has been working with young people for 30 years and their parents. So he's been a high school counselor, he's been a family therapist, he's helped people in a number of settings have more fulfilling and successful family relationships. And his name is Kim John Payne. And he is the author of a book called Simplicity Parenting and also The Soul of Discipline. So I wanted to talk to Kim about parenting, how us parents can really do a better job. I see a lot of parents out there floundering and struggling and feeling depleted and overwhelmed. And here in Boulder, what I notice, one of the trends is what I call over-attachment parenting, where you're a little too in your kid's business and a little bit enabling in terms of not letting your kids fail and fall down and get hurt and learn those valuable life lessons. So I also get curious about the amount of overwhelm coming at kids and parents these days with screens and technology and Snapchat and Facebook and our email and just the barrage of stuff we've got going on. And I notice in my own kids' life, when they feel overscheduled or overwhelmed, it's really a time to come back to connection. So in this interview, Kim and I talk about that. We talk about boundaries and how we can gather our children up to help them feel safe at home, which will allow them to thrive in the world. Because if kids don't feel safe in their own home, it's going to be tough for them to be creative, harder, and then they might orient to their peer group, which isn't exactly that safe, and might not be able to see them as well as a parent can. Okay, so Ellen and I have lots to say about this topic, and we might do our own podcast and a little bit more here. And I thought it was useful to interview Kim. We also get into the school shootings. Okay, we just can't avoid that's going on right now in high schools. Certainly younger schools and older schools, colleges, we see school shootings more and more common. It's like, what in the hell is going on here? So I asked Kim, who's got a lot of experience with this, what his take on this is. All right, so I think you're going to find this useful if you are a parent. Certainly you've been a child, so you can relate based on your own parents, having parents. And some of you are thinking about being parents, and it's a big undertaking, and I encourage you to sit with that. And for me, parenting is the most magical, incredible part of my life, is being a dad and being a parent. So I'm psyched to see other people stepping into this journey of parenting, and it's a lot of work. Any parent will agree with me there. Okay, let me say a couple words about Kim. Okay, Kim's a consultant and trainer to over 230 U.S. independent and public schools. Right? He's been a school counselor, adult educator, consultant, researcher, educator, and a private family counselor for 27 years, now 30. He regularly gives keynote addresses at international conferences for educators, parents, and therapists, and he runs workshops around the world. He's spoken and been a part of my kids' school here. My kids go to a Waldorf school, and he's been a part of a lot of Waldorf schools across the country. And he's, he's trained over 1,000 simplicity parenting coaches around the world. He's authored a #1 selling book, Simplicity Parenting, and he's been on media, lots of TV, including ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, and on radio with BBC, Sirius XM, and CBC and NPR. He's been featured in Time Magazine, Chicago Tribune, Parenting, Mothering, Times Union, and the LA Times. Lots of press, and this guy is just a warm-hearted soul. You're going to get that from him. So I'm psyched to get you some tools here as parents, especially around boundaries and why that's so hard for so many parents. All right, let's dive in with Mr. Kim John Payne. Welcome, Mr. Kim John Payne.
Thanks, Jayson. I always feel like I'm in trouble when I get all three names said,
You go by Kim, I'm assuming, yeah?
Kim will be great, yeah.
Okay,
fine.
Great. Well, welcome, Kim. I'm grateful to have you for a little bit here on the Smart Couple podcast. And being a fellow parent, I'm a fan of your work and what you're up to in the world, and certainly during these crazy times we're having with young people, which we'll get into. It's just a real treat to talk to someone like you. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's nice to be with you.
Yeah. So give the listener here a little bit of sense, maybe the 2-minute bio version of who are you and what are you up to in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a dad. That's my main qualification. 2 kids, 16 and 18. Live over on the border of Massachusetts and Vermont, up in the mountains. Have a farm. So farming is a big part of my life. But writing and working with families is the other, and working in schools. My work for a long time has been how to bring balance into family life, how to give kids a childhood, and how to have parents be able to feel that they can listen to that gut instinct that something is not quite right with the velocity of modern life, and how to simplify and balance that without feeling that you're taking your kids out of the mainstream of life. And I've also worked a lot on the themes of discipline and the deeper aspects of discipline. And the book that I'm working on right now switches gear a little bit. It's about how to stay centered ourselves as parents. That's it's called Being at Your Best When Your Kids Are at Their Worst. It's a book about emotional self-regulation right when you need it the most.
Yeah, great. Yeah, because we parents need that.
Yeah, really.
It's a big deal. Cool. I'm sitting here with your 2 books, The Soul of Discipline and Simplicity Parenting. You have more books than that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here with the ones we have in our home, which have been fabulous. So thanks for those. And I want to speak to a couple points from the book here in our interview today. And the first question I have, or let me just give you the shortest summary I can in a couple of sentences about what I understand the soul of discipline to be, and in the context of, parenting, really. And then I want to ask you some parenting questions around how important parents get on the same page, so a partnership, how important that is, and how to do it when, say, one parent has a different style or even values than the other parent and doesn't agree with maybe your approach here. So I want to get into some of those kind of conversations. But first, my understanding, what I loved about your book is it's so much about changing the language of pathology of a disobedient child and instead reframing it as the child's disoriented. And there's almost like a difference between their inner life and their outer life, and you're trying to help a child through good boundaries come back, and good governance to come back into alignment with themselves and to be oriented in the family and oriented to behaviors that are socially acceptable and also like good for the child's growth and well-being. Is that a fair summation? Would you tweak it a little bit?
Mm. Yeah, one of the things that occurred to me a while back, because I was a school counselor, private family counselor. I worked in group homes for violent teenagers. I've worked with kids who you'd look at and you'd say, "Wow, they are so disobedient. There's so much going on there." And I just don't. I've never met a disobedient child. I don't think there's any such thing as a willfully disobedient kid. Only a disoriented one.
Mm-hmm.
What they're doing is that they're echolocating us. They're pinging us. They send out this ping or
Right.
echolocation, and they kind of send this out, just like mariners at sea do. When they're trying to get their bearings, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting that we have that term in terms of our emotional responses. But it comes from navigators, of course, at sea when they're trying to get their bearings. And what they do is they send out these sonic pings,
Mm-hmm.
and it hits something and then bounces back. And then I'll send out another, it hits it, and I'll send out a few of them, and then they get their bearings. And once we realize that's what kids are doing, that we're getting pinged, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then a bunch of things, like 3 or 4 key things, start to change in terms of how we relate to a child. And the Soul of Discipline book goes into that a little bit. That book came out a couple of years ago now. I've had further thoughts since then as well. But once we know that our kid is pinging us, then yeah, I don't want to overclaim, but it is a bit of a game changer. I've heard that
Yeah.
from a ton of parents. It shifts things, and it shifts it in 3 or 4 key ways.
Yeah. I wonder if you'd talk about those 3 or 4 key ways, especially in the context of reframing it from disobedient to disorientation.
Yeah, well, one of the first things when we can kind of really internalize, sort of get it at a visceral level that our kids are lost, that they're pinging us, that they're echolocating. One of the first things, it's a really simple, it's a very intuitive for any parent, is then we can look at a child, at a tween or a teenager, and have a little bit of an internal conversation or question, thinking, what's up? What's up with you? I wonder what's going on. Why are you behaving like that? Huh, that's unusual. I wonder
Mm-hmm.
what's happening. Any of those thoughts, excuse me, any of those thoughts mean something really special because then we're becoming what I think of as inquisitive rather than accusative.
Yeah.
What we're doing, and in doing that, um, we we give ourselves just that little bit of a pause while we're being inquisitive and wondering. And as a ton of parents have said to me, it's almost impossible to take it personally then. If you're wondering what's going on, then you're in a different place within yourself. You're not going to get into it with your kid, the old action reaction kind of arguing stuff that can start up very fast.
Yeah.
In this case, that's the first thing. So it helps us not take it personally.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing, this is my favorite part actually. The second thing is that, so we're asking, what's up? I wonder what's going on. And we might be thinking, wow, that we shouldn't have stayed up so late last night, or was it because you've had too many play dates, or is it because you've had too much sugar, or
Right.
whatever,
Screen time or whatever. Yeah.
screen time, and there could be like a catalog of things that you're wondering about, and that's great. But the main event here is that you actually don't need a concrete answer at all.
Hmm.
The answer is secondary. What's primary is that you've opened up a space in your heart, in your being. You've opened up a non-judgmental and wondering space.
Yeah.
And the third thing is okay. The first is we're getting pinged. The second is we don't need an answer. We don't have to be this perfect parent with all these perfect answers, and
Yeah.
we can just wonder. It's enough to wonder. And the third thing is that in that space where we're wondering, I wonder what's going on. It's our kids can really sense that we're being non-judgmental.
Hmm.
Our kids can sense that we're not going to be this scary, shouty parent or this cold, rejecting parent, or because then they'll ping us even more, right?
Uh-huh.
Then the pinging gets
Yeah.
worse. You see, when our, and this is obvious, forgive me for saying the obvious, but when our kids are at their angriest and most defiant, it's also when they're at their most emotionally vulnerable.
Mm.
And any little change we have within us, like wondering what's up, they'll pick up and they'll then be able to get close to us. They won't have to push back so hard because they'll see. A lot of parents have said to me over the years that stuff happens like their eyes soften. They just get
Hmm.
softer eyes. Their shoulders relax. Their head tilts to one side rather than getting ready for impact.
Yeah.
And there's these subtle little gesture changes. Our voice our throat opens up a little bit, and our voice comes from a slightly more resonant place. It doesn't
Hmm.
feel squeezed and harsh.
Yeah.
All these subtle little messages children particularly are attuned to, because when you're a child, your survival instinct given to us from thousands of years ago is to read subtle signs, because when we're children, we're not powerful enough to fight back. So reading facial affect, voice, gesture is what kids are good at.
Hmm.
They're just naturally wired to be able to do that more at that age than at any other time. So the wondering what's up, the relieving ourselves of the pressure of having to have an answer and be a perfect parent, our kids sense that, and they can drop their guard a little bit. And
Hmm.
the upset, the defiance, the pushback, whatever it is, um, regulates in a quicker way, and the adrenaline drains. The adrenaline starts to drain down, and you've got a child who'll be able to get back to being themselves in 5 or 10 minutes, as opposed to 50 or 60 minutes and counting if they have to keep pushing back against us.
Yeah. So I'm hearing that the more we can soften with that curiosity, right, that spaciousness, the more it's going to help them, right?
They pick it right up. I don't
Yeah.
know if you've experienced that with your
Oh, yeah.
kids, but they'll do stuff and then they'll do like naughty stuff and then they'll look right at you.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're looking at you to think, I wonder what he's going to do.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's a really powerful, I mean, again, reframe and a reminder for us to stay. You didn't call it, it's not inquisition, but what was the word?
That's good. It's not an inquisition, it's being inquisitive.
Inquisitive. Exactly. Like inquiry, like being curious, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And I'm just curious because I'm, of course, thinking in the context of a couple and a partnership. I feel like a lot of couples are that sensitive with each other. So we're sensitive to reading still as adults, facial cues of our live-in partner. If we've lived with them for many years, we kind of know the eyes and the affect, and you look away a little
Yeah.
bit, and I know I'm triggered. Would you say that also is true for adults? It just this plays out there also, and the same attitude could be applied to a partnership here.
It's the same sort of wiring kicks in with partnerships. And the reason for that, again, just going back into our long distant past as human beings, the people we're closest to, the people we let closest to us, let's say, are in the past, we if we were out in the fields with our family, hunting, gathering, or whatever, and then there was a noise, a sound from a predator.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things we do, it's really interesting, is that almost simultaneously we'll look towards the scary noise, but we would in the long distance past very quickly look towards our partner. So we'd look towards our partner to actually check in. What was that? And so it's this kind of thread that connects partners to primal threat.
Mm-hmm.
And so with our partnerships, we're also wired to really read each other because,
Yeah.
if we look to our partner and they just shake their head and say, no, no, don't worry. That was just a tree moving in the wind. Don't worry about it. And they just say, it's okay. Then we can stand down. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, phew, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So partners, we are particularly wired to read each other as partners. And it's interesting that you picked that up, Jayson, because, right on the heels of us talking about kids, because that's what we also do for the people close to us as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. You have I think, I can't remember if this was yours or I know you've read the Hold On to Your Kids book and you reference that book sometimes, Gordon and Gabor's book.
Yeah.
Connect and then direct. It seems to me that if a parent is setting a boundary, because you talk a lot about boundaries and how essential they are as the child grows, because it helps the kids feel safe, right? Is that if a parent is setting those boundaries from a pretty reactive place, it's not going to achieve the same result, right? From fear and reactivity, and if I'm just trying to get you on and make a threat, as opposed to sort of this place of curiosity and then a redirection or a place of building connection first or empathy. Would you say a little bit more about this concept of connect and then direct, or
Mm-hmm.
the vital nature of having almost safety established or something before we set a limit?
Yeah, I live in New England, as I mentioned, and just recently I was riding my motorcycle with my wife over to the coast of Maine, and we're up on a hilltop in Maine looking at that beautiful rugged coastline. And it really struck me, there was a metaphor there which was so powerful. There was a man-made, or there was a sort of a bit of a peninsula, and then a man-made wall, human-made wall that came around, and it was really just encompassing, and it made this beautiful harbor. And the boats would come in, fairly choppy seas outside, and the boats would come into this harbor with this big, like almost like an arm around the harbor, and the water was calm
Mm-hmm.
in there. And I was just standing there looking at that, and Catherine and I were just talking about it. And I said, yeah, but we were thinking about that because once you're a relational person, you're always looking for these. You see stuff like this, and you relate it to
Yeah.
relationships. And I said, yeah, but have you noticed how all the lobster guys, lobster men and women, and all the repair places, that's right near the beach. Then the stores and shops and such, they're one back. And then the houses, they're up the hill and they're back even further. And how right on the edge of the peninsula is the harbour master who's got an eye on what's coming in and what's going out. And I thought, that is so like what we hope for with our families.
Mm.
We've got a safe harbor, and there we are as the harbor master, watching the ships come in and out, like watching our kids, being sensitive to what comes into our families and what is not going to come in, the
Mm-hmm.
forces we allow in, and what we're saying, no, that's not what our family does. We don't do that kind of stuff. We don't watch that kind of television. We don't say those kind of words, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I also was struck by the organization, that things had a purpose, they had a reason, and everyone could rely on them. You could really connect into that environment because there was predictability and order
Mm-hmm.
in the harbor. And I thought that's what we're aiming for, and maybe that's what Dr. Neufeld, and Gabor Mate are talking about as well, is this creating a safe harbor, because we know our kids are going to have to go out there into the choppy waters. I mean, that's called recess at school,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That It's going to
Yeah.
happen every day. It really is. How is it that they see home as safe harbor? And I guess that's what my books and my work is about, is recognizing that our kids will necessarily have to come across, difficult events. And this is where my work perhaps is a little bit different to Gordon's. I'm not sure, but that I don't want to fall victim to what I think of as harmony
Hmm.
addiction,
Right.
where where every day
We get
has to
along all
be
the
safe.
time.
We all get along, and everything has to be safe. Everything has to be connected. Every person, there has to be connection at all
Harmony addiction, is that what
times.
you called it?
Yeah, I'm
That's
sorry.
great.
It's
No,
yeah.
that's great. I like that. Remember all that.
um, but it's um, because often our kids in life will experience disconnect. And it's really important that we don't go blaming teachers and we don't go blaming coaches and we don't go blaming people because they're not in good connection with our kids.
Yeah.
What's important, I find, is that we've got a safe harbor for our kids to come back into
Yeah.
connection, where the water is a little gentler, where they're a little safer, where things are a bit more organized, where you can strategize with a kid when they come home saying a teacher's being mean or whatever, or kids are being mean, or my coach won't let me do this or that, and to be able to strategize and plan with them at that stage,
Hmm.
so that we can plan in how to make a connection, but not presume someone is somehow being is not serving our kids if they're not in full connection at all times.
Yeah.
That's the piece that I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great. You also talk about, I kind of want to get into boundaries here. You also talk about, but also not giving kids too many choices,
right,
right? And can
right.
you say a little bit about the too many choices sort of parenting approach and letting kids decide and things like that?
Yeah, this is one of the ones that is almost like counterculture. At least it was 10 years ago. I used to get some sort of raised eyebrows when I'd say this stuff about not giving kids choices, right? Because many parents, what really well-meaning parents, would give their kids loads and loads of choices because they wanted them to be able to manage choices well.
Yeah.
They wanted to be able to do that. And I get it. I share that aim as well. But having had a long interest in neuropsychology and neurobiology, I thought about it a lot, and I thought, you know, we've got to try and figure out this thing about choices. And what I've come to is that when kids are little, they need limited choices.
Hmm.
Choices are okay, but honestly, if you're walking down the beach, it's a holiday, long awaited holiday, and you say to your 3 and 5 year old little boys, who would like the red bucket and who would like the yellow bucket? Your day is done. you know, the peacefulness of the day is ended right there
Yeah.
with the argument
Yeah.
that's going to happen.
Yeah.
What what I mean by limited choices is I call them you may choices, that you may choose between the granola, the flakes, or some toast for
Yeah.
breakfast.
Yeah.
You may choose. Basically, it's a choice that you're saying is okay, and then your child can, choose one of those three and feel good about it. Because you see, what's happened in the last sort of 10, 15 years is with giving kids too many choices too young,
And too big of choices.
too big, yeah, is that then they'll choose something and it's not a really great choice, right? And then the parenting books will tell us to say to the child, well, now, was that a poor choice? Was that a good choice
Yeah.
or the best choice? And they feel like they get angry, they get mad because they feel like they've been set up.
Yeah.
They feel it's a set up job. And, or they'll say to us, oh, poor choice,
Yeah.
because they know that's the best thing to say to get away from this totally weird person,
Hmm.
asking stuff. It's like the you may choices. help a child with a choice that's within their social and emotional ability to actually make.
Yeah.
And then they make it, and then they can feel good about it. Because giving children too many choices too young is just basically stressful. It's
Yeah.
extremely
Well, and it
stressful.
seems like sometimes I notice parents will give kids choices that are too big because the parent doesn't want to have to deal with the decision themselves. So they put it on the kid. Like, which school would you like to go to? And the kid is
Oh, I
maybe
know.
in fourth grade and it's like, or second grade. And it's like, wow, you're really putting that decision on your child? That seems like one that's just way too big, right? For a kid. Parents need to take that.
Yeah, and then a child will choose what school they go to in the sixth grade or whatever, and then it won't work out because they made the choice based on the fact that the person that they play baseball with, who they really would like to be friends with, goes to that school.
Right.
Right. Like, and that's not the best rationale to be
Yeah.
choosing which school to go to, and then it doesn't work out. Like I was out front of my school one day, and a little girl, mother was talking to a little girl, and she said to her, "Now, would you like to come to Daddy's work? Would you like to go to Sophia's place to play? Would you like to come shopping with me? Would you like a ride on the space shuttle?" I mean, I don't know. It
Yeah.
was just this. And a little girl, I knew her, kindergartner. She was just gone into first grade, and she was quite a gal, quite feisty. And she said to her mother, "Don't ask me." Right? And the mum said, she knelt down, got to her level, and said, "Now let's go to your feelings." I knew which book she'd been reading, by the way. I knew
Yeah.
which parenting book. And she said, "Now let's go to your feelings. What are your feelings feeling? Are your feelings feeling angry right now? Are you feeling?" And she started in again with
Yeah.
all these choices. So the little girl did an incredibly sensible thing. She hauled back and she kicked her mother so hard, and she just ran, right? She just took off. And I thought, "You go, girl."
Yeah.
Like, what
Yeah.
a terribly sensible response. And the mother, the thing is, the mum was really trying to be a good mum.
Sure.
She was
Of
she
course.
was totally trying to do her best. And so what she was doing was giving those choices to a child way too young. Now the mum looked up at me, right? The school counsellor is standing 10 feet away, like,
Yeah.
"Oh no,"
Yeah.
right? And
Busted.
so you busted, and this guy who writes books, and she looks up at me and she said, "Oh, that didn't go well, did it?" And I said to her, "You know what? That was a really kind thing you were trying to do there. But exactly what you did, that's going to be perfect when she's 16. It's just going to be so great.
Right.
But she's 6 right now, and it's harder for her because it stresses her out. All those choices are stressful."
Mm-hmm.
And I think what she did was just out of stress, not to be a bad girl, not to
Right.
be, anything other than just stressed.
Yeah.
But when kids get a little bit bigger, when they're like, um, 9, 10, particularly 11, 12, something really important happens. Is that in terms of the developing brain, is they start to cross the corpus callosum. They start to cross the brain bridge between right and left brain, and they start to get a better handle on social and emotional cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really interesting, it surprises a lot of people, is that's not really starting to become operational until around 11 or 12 years old. And yet, all these parenting books, and I don't mean to be, negative about them really, but I don't agree. Just out of the straight brain science, kids, you can't be logical with
Yeah.
kids, socially and emotionally logical. It's not possible. It stresses them,
Mm-hmm.
and until they're around, it begins around 9. I don't know, how old are your kids, Jayson?
9 and 7.
Oh, really? Right on. Oh man,
Yeah.
9. I mean, the 9 years, the 9 year change, right? It's a bit of a kicker, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a beautiful time. But may I ask, what are you experiencing around 9 with your kid?
Yeah. Well, I think he's slightly behind in terms of that arc. But it's really beautiful right now. It's really
Yeah.
amazing. We're not seeing all the sort of classic signs that we might around the 9-year change yet.
Yeah,
He
I'm
just
glad you
turned
put,
9
yeah.
too.
Yeah, and you know what? The 9-year change doesn't have to be trouble. It doesn't. It really doesn't have to involve a kid. Just like a child turning 14, 15, totally does not have to be horrible.
Yeah.
I think if we think it's going to be horrible, it kind of will be.
Uh-huh. Right.
Um, no, the 9-year change is when um, it's really when a child starts to develop a new kind of connection to the world and a
Mm-hmm.
new
Right.
connection to the adults around them. And it's when it's a time when it's almost like they're leaving early childhood behind, but they haven't begun middle childhood yet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit insecure,
Yeah.
that time. And that's when they need us as adults to be really centered. I get it that some 9-year olds are hard work, because you know how I talked about pinging
Yeah.
before? I talked about the
Yeah.
kids ping. They one of the times they ping is when they're at developmental transitions, I guess you'd call it, when things are changing in their
Mm-hmm.
lives, both emotionally and so on. That's when they ping. Like they will ping around about sort of 5, 4.5, 5. They can do it sometimes around about 9, 14. There are times, right, when kids ping, and it's usually because they're developing stuff inwardly that they don't know where they stand anymore.
Yeah.
Something's changed. And so that's when the pinging will start. The other time when kids ping, by the way, is when there's a lot of changes going on in their life outwardly, like say, there's been a move of a house, or dad's job has changed and he's working longer hours, or mum's working longer hours, or grandpa just died, or a very dear family pet is really sick, or whatever. That's when kids ping as well. It's not only at developmental changes that are inward, it's
Yeah.
also when there's stuff going on outwardly. And then the third category, actually, just while I'm mentioning it, when kids ping, is when life is overwhelming them,
Mm-hmm.
when things are moving too fast. It's just too much going on too soon, too young. That's when kids will ping because they're overwhelmed. That's actually the theme of that Simplicity Parenting
Yeah.
book that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the pinging, if I understand it right, is again kind of like a call to reorient,
hmm
right?
It totally is. It's really hard because when our kids are doing that, it's really hard not to think that they're doing it consciously, because they're so darn good at it. Um, we, but no kid wakes up in the morning and checks a list and thinks, I wonder how I can upset my dad today.
Yeah. Of course.
I think I'll choose number 3.
Right.
They're tempted to think that because they're so skilled, but they're not.
Mm-hmm.
They're totally not. It's very spontaneous, and so the pinging often happens. I find the most common form of pinging these days is due to overwhelm,
Yeah.
is due to kids just doing too much too soon. It's too sexy. It's too young. There's just too much adult information coming at them, which they can't make sense
Mm-hmm.
of, particularly on coming down the pike at them on screens,
Yeah.
computers and TVs and such, and it's kind of overwhelming them. It's think of it like waters that are buffeting them and pushing them around,
Oh,
and
yeah.
their little boats are really, and of course they're going to try and navigate out of
Mm-hmm.
those really stormy waters, and they're going to navigate out of it by getting their bearings by pinging us,
Yeah.
right? That's what they do.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Thanks for that. I remember when my son was about 5 and I went from part-time stay-at-home dad to full-time work.
Wow,
My
big
son
change.
like pinged me big time,
Yeah.
and his behavior, the quote acting out, which wasn't disobedience, right? From this perspective, he was disoriented, and it took a lot of just one-on-one time with him and reconnecting to make sure we were cool.
Mm.
And then it didn't. We transitioned out of that within a month. It was really beautiful, but it was a hard month, you know.
It is a hard month, but it's so great that you understood that.
Hmm.
You didn't miss the cues, if I
Right.
may say.
We knew something was going on. I was like, what? Why is he acting like this? It was just out of
Right.
nowhere. And
But
then
you
we
see, that's
connected the dots, right?
right, because you were inquisitive. You weren't blaming him for his behavior.
Right.
You were asking, what's going on,
Yeah. What's
man?
going on?
And you see, and then, I don't know, it's like one's heart opens
Hmm.
and a child can sense it and can come back to being themselves a whole bunch quicker. Because what you talked about a month, and that was a hard month, I'm guessing that it is, I hope, an educated guess, that would have gone on several
Oh
months
yeah.
and extended for a whole bunch longer time unless you'd come up with that.
Yeah.
That, like, oh, okay, I got to move in
I think you're right.
and let him know that
Hmm.
we're cool, that we're fine. Daddy's still right here for you. Yeah.
Totally.
Mm.
Well, I want to talk about boundaries for a minute, more specifically, and start with a question really like, why are boundaries so hard for parents? Setting
Yeah.
them, following through with them, staying consistent, like, because that seems to be the thing I noticed when I just noticed all the parents out there struggling. It seems to be parent or boundaries. Like, it's just like
Yeah.
hard for us parents. What's up with that?
Yeah. No, great question. I think at the core of it is that we all want to have our relationship with our kid be child centered. We want to have a child centered family. But as a society these days, we're confusing that with child led. We're confusing child centered and child led.
Right.
And it's hard because then the kid calls the shots and then
Mm-hmm.
everything becomes hard. There's a difference between being like authoritarian and being authoritative.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wonder, I meet with parents, like I have a private family, counseling practice, and I meet with parents, from all around the world, via Skype, like we're talking today. And it's the same in many cultures. It's not just a kind of a US centric thing. Is that when I talk with parents about this, they'll quickly talk about their own biography.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I was raised in a certain way,
Yeah.
and that's usually an authoritarian
Mm-hmm.
way. And some parents, there's a few parents who would say the opposite. I was raised without boundaries. We're getting a generation of younger parents now who weren't raised with any boundaries. It was just that some of the younger parents, the sort of 23, 24, 25-year-olds, are the sort of second generation of digitally raised kids, screen kids.
Yeah.
So they had very little connection to their parents. But most parents, majority, say, I just don't want to be this harsh authoritarian figure.
Yeah.
Uh, um,
Because that's what I
and
grew up with. And so I'm
right, that's what I
compensating,
grew up
right?
with, and I'm compensating. And I again, I got to applaud a parent who thinks about that because clearly they're thinking, they're
Yeah.
consciously saying that happened to me, and I'm going to do something of my own choosing. And I think that's a great, like, that's really good first base,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not second, third, or home. But it's a
Yeah.
great start.
Right.
I think where we can go on from there and have it be a little healthier is to say, well, okay, I don't want to be in complete reaction because that's just a pendulum swing the other way, and that's not going to be helpful. Because what I see happening more and more, Jayson, is that I see parents who are also confusing wanting to be friendly with being friends.
Mm-hmm.
And our kids don't want us to be friends. That's stressful, right?
Yeah.
Because then they don't know who's in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, in a sense, it's what I think of as peer parenting, where we raise our kids like they're our peers,
Yeah.
like they're our buddies.
Yeah.
Um, and I think of it in terms of attachment, I think of it as horizontal attachment, and there isn't the vertical. There isn't the vertical. See, the vertical and the horizontal do connect. Horizontal and horizontal, it's not so easy for kids because then when they, for example, they go to grandma or grandpa's house or they go to school, and a teacher will, direct a fourth grade or third grade or whatever to say, third grade, put your books away now, please. Now, it's a simple direction.
Mm-hmm.
But a child who's been raised horizontally with a buddy as a dad or a mum, and not really a dad,
Yeah.
but they find it's not that they're being naughty, because they don't put their book away, right? They just don't do it.
Yeah.
They just, there's not that they're being naughty or anything. They just are really struggling to recognize an adult authoritative presence
Yeah.
because they haven't had one much in their lives. Their mum and dad are being friends.
Right.
So when a teacher or a grandma or grandpa says do something, it looks for all the world like they're being defiant,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not. It's not their fault. They're not being defiant. It's just that a teacher walks into a room and they just look up and there's a buddy, there's another kid coming into the room,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm really worried about kids who get raised this way because I see that what we do is we put them on a collision course
Mm-hmm.
with school, with extended family, and in the future, how are these kids going to relate to having a boss?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, they're on a collision course with reality.
Yeah, yeah, and we don't mean it. We don't. No parent, sort of says, "Oh, I want to put my kid on a collision course." It just is it's a thing that happens that
Mm-hmm.
has become, it's almost become ubiquitous. It's almost the new normal now. And when you see and what happens is that we're buddies, we're good, we're cool, we're fine, we're buddies, and then we snap, and then just okay, we've had enough, and then we kind of shout or get aggressive because the child's just not even vaguely doing what we're asking them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then the child's really confused because you're shouting at me now. You're not allowed to shout at me because you're my sibling.
Yeah.
You're not my dad. You're my sibling. In fact,
Right.
you're my younger sibling.
Yeah.
And the other
Yeah.
piece in this, if I may, just to round this depressing picture off,
Yeah.
is when we as adults are kind of displaced, when we move out of that leadership space with our kids, in that kind of when we abdicate leadership and we want to be the kid's friend,
Mm-hmm.
then what happens is that our children are wired neurologically to need that kind of safety through leadership. And what happens is that then they try and occupy that space,
Mm-hmm.
right?
They get really
And
bossy and
they get so bossy and
controlling.
so over controlling. And then what happens is that if they're siblings, they start fighting over who's top dog.
Uh-huh.
And you get a lot of sibling issues. So when parents, call me and speak to me on Skype or whatever, and they call me and they talk about sibling stuff, one of the things that I first go to and I first sort of walk around a bit and explore with a parent, and it's a good question for any of your community listening in today, is if the kids aren't getting on well, I mean, part of that's just plain normal, right?
Yeah.
It's normal. But if you've got a feeling that it's particularly not so great, sometimes it's a signal that we've gotten too busy and we've taken our eye off the leadership space, off the eye of the leadership ball. One foot is out of the
Mm-hmm.
leadership space because
Mm-hmm.
life's got busy and we've had big work demands. It's not our fault. We don't mean it, but it is usually a really great signal to us if kids are fighting a lot and fighting over who's in charge. It's usually telling us we have to move in and occupy that
Occupy that
leadership
seat.
space.
Yep.
Yeah, and then I can't tell you how many times parents will ring back and say, we're good, it's fine, that's what it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not always, but
Mm-hmm.
it's very often the case, and it's usually the positive part of that is it's signaling to us our work-life balance has gotten out of whack,
Mm-hmm.
and then we can do something about it rather than beating ourselves up like, oh, I'm an unworthy parent, I'm sort of, rather than doing that, just see, the way I think about behavior with our kids is just communication.
Mm-hmm.
All they're doing is communicating. Just like your little boy when you went from being at home to then doing work outside the house, full-time work. He was just communicating to you,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
you read the signs. He's a lucky boy to have a dad read the signs, because often our work, when our work life um, imbalance gets really hectic, it's super hard to read the signs, because
Yeah.
we're being overwhelmed.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
dealing with my stress now. This kid's stress. Maybe my partnership's not great. I'm dealing with that stress.
Yep.
So it is hard to read the signs. I appreciate you mentioning that.
Okay.
Because parents are also under so much pressure, these days, just like the kids are. And so, yeah, this is really great. There was two other points I wanted to make with this, Kim, which is it also sort of can breed sort of unintentionally breed like an entitlement culture, right? So I grow up and I don't have to answer to anybody. And like you said, that's not how the world works. And then also, I notice sometimes us parents, um, we might let our kids' emotions be the leader. In other words, that's what
Right.
dictates the decisions. Well, if
Mm-hmm.
Johnny doesn't like it, then we better not do it. So, can you give just the parents one tip here that would help them kind of ground in their own leadership? Like, what's one thing they can do to find their leadership seat?
I think the first thing is to understand the difference. As I mentioned before, I want to pick up that theme of what authoritativeness is as opposed to being authoritarian, because the word authority comes from the word author,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like in a sense, it's to be the author of your family's morals and ethics and the way you want to live,
Yeah.
and to understand that discipline isn't harsh. Discipline need not be harsh. Again, looking at root derivatives of words, discipline shares the same root derivative as disciple, being worthy of being followed.
Hmm.
And so that when we apply discipline, we're actually defining our family values. It's like I write in the book that I was preparing a class, actually. I was a school counselor, but I used to teach some. And I was preparing a seventh grade history class on the Renaissance. And your kid will go through this, Jayson, when they're in a Waldorf school, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's at seventh grade in a Waldorf school.
I think so. Okay.
Yeah, so I was a school counselor and teacher in a Waldorf school. And I was reading the biography of Michelangelo, and people would ask him how he carved David. It's such an amazing carving. Like, how did he do it? And he answered, I didn't carve David. I really didn't. I took away that which was not of
Yeah.
David.
Yeah, I
I
love
took
that part.
away,
Yeah.
yeah, it's beautiful. And so every time we're defining discipline, every time we're applying discipline, I beg your pardon, we're defining family values. Because if our kid brings home the word from kindergarten, for example, stupid, you'll say, that's so stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And we think, whoa, yeah, okay, hello world, where did
Yeah.
that come from? But we say to our little boy, we move in quietly, little girl, and we say, we don't, that's not a word. We try really hard to not use hurtful words like that. That's a hurtful word. No, something must be bugging you, and you can tell me what's bugging you, but we try hard not to use words like that. So you're not shutting the child down. In fact, you're opening up what's bugging him, but you're really saying, no way. That's not what we say in our family. You may not talk to your little brother like that. No way. That is defining our family, right? It's taking away that which is not of our family. And all our families are beautifully different. I mean, there's no one way here, but when our kids do stuff, say stuff, that is not of your family, one of the ways to step right back into that authoritative space is to understand that we're only doing good when
Mm-hmm.
we discipline in that way, because then our kids understand what our family stands for.
Yeah.
And we're back to the safe harbor,
I
right?
was just going to say the watchman on the harbor, right? Holding the whole thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thanks. With our limited time left, I just wanted to ask you, I got to go there, which is the school shootings. This is really up for you right now. The people are asking you all kinds of questions. What do we do? How did this happen? It's just parents' responsibility. Is this really about gun control? What the hell's going on here? I would just love to get your thoughts, Kim. What is going on here?
Yeah, you must be thinking a lot about that, Jayson, because you're in Colorado, right?
Yeah,
And it happened big time in Colorado,
right.
and now it's happened again, and will, I hope not, but may happen in the future. One of the things to understand when big world tragedies happen in general is that our kids will ping us more than ever. It's great we've talked about that today, because it's a good way. Like it for a lot of kids, it'll knock them off center, even if they're older and they stay cool about it, and even if you don't have much TV and you have a limited screen home, they'll be going to school or wherever, and they'll hear about it. Most kids will hear about it, and so it's one of the key pieces in this is to know that if they act out in those 3 or 4 days, week or so after big stuff like this happens, it's because they're pinging. It's because
Mm-hmm.
they're off center, they're nervous, so to understand that and not snap back at them, not tell them off, shout at them, but to understand and in a sense ask what's up. But in this case, we probably know, right? We probably know what's up is that they're feeling scared. The other thing is to assure them that we're safe right here. We're secure. I'm here for you. The people around you who love you are here, and you're connected to us. We're bonded together, and our home is a good place to be. You're safe here.
Mm-hmm.
But further, I think we can go a little further in that with little kids. I think it's really important to, and here I'm leaning into the simplicity parenting 4 pillars of simplicity. But just real quick, given our limited time, I'll just name them real quick. And maybe I'll send you over an article on this and I'll put it up on our Facebook site
Right.
as well,
Great.
in how to talk to kids about world events, tragic world events. And okay, so here are these 4 things. Is that one is with the home environment, keep it really dialed back. Just go bring it back and make it a little quieter. Dial up the schedule, dial up the rhythm that you have in the home. Make meal times, like really pay attention to having meal times for the next week or 2 or 3 really be rhythmical at the same time, in the same way. Bedtime at the same time, in the same way, because it's rhythms that secure a kid.
Yeah.
It's rhythms that say to a child invisibly over and over, you are
Yeah.
secure,
You're safe
you
here.
are secure,
Mm-hmm.
you're safe here. Then dial back the scheduling, like just let a child have a little bit more decompression time. And they can't do that if you keep up the velocity of soccer practice and play dates and
Piano and
all this stuff
everything
going
else.
on,
Yeah.
running around. And some of that's normal and some of it's okay. But after big world tragedies, dial that stuff down.
It's like
Yeah,
collect your family almost. That's what I
collect them
hear.
in. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well put. Because it's collect them in, but give kids more decompression time, because when they have decompression time, it gives them time to play. And play is how they digest the world.
Mm-hmm.
Play is how they get it all back in order inwardly. Because if they can inwardly order things, then they won't have to ping you
Mm-hmm.
to order,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
there's a big bonus in giving kids more downtime is that they won't be going at you, right? And then the last thing is just dial back the reports, the screens, the what they're hearing on the radio. These because every time a child hears another report about a tragedy, a school shooting or such, every time they hear it, they get a rush of cortisol and adrenaline.
Mm-hmm.
Every time the amygdala, the fight or flight brain, is fired. One of the really interesting studies that I read after 9/11, because I was in New York on 9/11
Mm.
and helping schools cope with what was going on there. And the kids who literally saw the trade towers fall and had to come into shelters and had little or no access to screen media because everything was down in the city at
Yeah.
that time. Cell phones were down, everything was down. So they saw the planes hit and that awful tragedy, right? So so there's that group of kids, and there was a lot of attention paid, and their stress levels, and people like me were helping out. But what came to light is that kids who saw the trade towers fall on television and saw it over and over on half-hourly news cycles or even less,
Yeah.
they actually were more traumatized than the kids who were there,
Yeah. That
right?
makes
So,
sense. Yeah.
doesn't it? But it's like, I think because our screen life, TV life, news stuff has become so under the radar now, like the new normal, is that we underestimate if we're driving in the car for an hour or so and they're hearing about this event and live from the event and they're hearing about this over and over, and we think, well, they're 10, 11, 12 years old, maybe they should be hearing about this. What's happening is that their amygdala, every time a new piece of information comes in, or exactly the same report is
Mm-hmm.
given, the amygdala, the fight or flight reptilian brain, is now becoming the king. That's now
Yeah,
dominating.
for sure.
And they're getting really, really stressed. So dial back the amount of adult
Okay.
conversation
Yeah.
around this and dial back their access to the information around it. And if they need information about it, it should come from you and your heart and your mouth and your interpretation rather than someone else's.
Yeah, great. And we'll include your article that you send us in our show notes. So if the listener wants to check that out, you can go to the show notes for that. And just a more direct question about like this latest case in Florida. We want to look for answers, right? And I'm just curious to get your expert opinion here on is this I mean, I know it's a probably a question that it's case by case, right? But with the increase in the prevalence of school shootings, is this a parenting issue? Is this an attachment issue? Like, what if you had to just kind of guess, or given that you've thought about this so much, what's your sense of this? I know it's
That's a really
multi-layered, but
it's a really fair question, and it is multi-layered. I agree. We're living in a time where our gut instinct is telling us as parents that something's not right, something's up. This is just too much is coming at our kids. We don't have enough time with them. And it's just out of whack. Something is disconnected. And my real hope here is that, when I first wrote Simplicity Parenting, or when I first started going down that route, you might remember from the book, Jayson, I talk about my work when I was in refugee camps. I was working in some pretty tough war zones and slums and hard places around the world as just a very small, volunteer as a young guy in a much bigger effort that was being made. But I saw stress, and I saw kids in war, and I saw people in war zones, really up close.
mm-hmm.
And in the Simplicity Parenting book, I write about my surprise when I came back to the West and I started to study this stuff, do post-grad study, and started studying it. And I had this little counseling practice. But through the doors were coming kids who looked stressed, they looked nervous, they looked jumpy, they looked hypervigilant, they were over-controlling, just like the kids in Cambodia, that I'd just left. And
Mm-hmm.
it was really weird because I thought and I got to confess, as a young guy, I thought, no, no, I'm not even going to let that thought in because it's too big. I tried to shut it out,
Mm.
but it wouldn't get shut out. It kept coming back, and I came to think these kids looked like they were coming from war zones, only they were coming from regular homes. Um, but they were mixed cultural, mixed ethnic, mixed economic backgrounds. There was no one group, but they looked like the kids I'd just left in these war zones.
Yeah.
And I came to think of it, and I write about this in the book, I came to think of it as the undeclared war on childhood. And I think the biggest thing that we can do is in the undeclared war on childhood is to declare peace in our homes. Because if our kids are growing up in a war zone where too much is coming at them too soon, they're getting overwhelmed, and that's what war is. It overwhelms kids. It overwhelms the human spirit, and then we start to do crazy things in the face of that overwhelm. Now, I'm not saying these current school shooters and shooters that comply to this. We don't know yet. I don't know. But what I do know for sure is that we have almost 1,000 simplicity parenting coaches all around the world, right? This is quite a movement now. This book has become one of the biggest selling parenting books in the world. And I don't say that out of any sense of vanity or whatever. It's just that this is a really big issue for a lot of us right now, is this overwhelm and our gut instinct. This is where I get a lot of hope. The hope comes for me is that our instinct for us as parents it's really hard to kill out the instinct to protect for our kids, to provide and to protect. And if we can dial back and live a little bit more of a balanced and simple life and give our kids the boundaries and the loving limits they need and be that harbor master, then our kids will connect to not just us, but they'll connect to humanity and they'll connect to themselves. And that's where empathy arises. And it's really, really hard to do someone harm if empathy is alive within you. Sorry, that's a longer answer to a really, but it's your fault because it's such a great question.
Hey, we don't do blame on this podcast.
You're right.
Nice, thank you. That's really great. I just to offer the listener and myself some peace of mind there, and with what's going on. And I really agree. Like, we're kind of overwhelmed, and like it's that back to that. Let's come back to the family and really nurture what we have here and slow down and stop doing so much. And can we make this a priority here? That's why I love what you're doing, because that's what we attempt to create here in our own home, and it feels really resonant. So thanks. Last question here is, I started the relationship school as an attempt to meet some of the world's problems. And, I never took an intimacy class in school on how to do a love relationship well, or how to work out differences with another person. So I'm on a mission to teach 1,000 teens and young adults to how to do this well. So I ask experts and just fathers and husbands and people in the service industry the same question, which is, and all my guests, which is, if I had a room full of 1,000 teenagers and I only could say one thing to them about relationships, and you were whispering in my ear that thing, like you were giving me advice, like, Jayson, say this, what would you have me tell them?
Well, the first thing, Jayson, is that with your kids going to the school they go to, when they're in high school, they will get that class. Okay, that's the first thing that's really hopeful.
Yeah.
Is in Waldorf schools, they teach about relationships directly in high school. If I could whisper in your ear, I would say that what we need to help our kids, our teenagers, is to understand about the 4 kinds of love. About love. It's not about sexuality. It's not about a whole bunch of other stuff. It's really about love and the differences of love, and in terms of how then to appropriately and calibrate their connections with others, because it's a lot of teenagers get themselves into some difficult places because they either over or under expect from their peers and from the people around them. And if I can take a moment just to describe what I mean by that, is that the first kind of love, and I'm borrowing from C.S. Lewis here, I'm kind of interpreting his work. He's a guy, as you know, who wrote Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, The Chronicles of Narnia. He was also an amazing, wise soul, and he talked about first kind of love is eros. It's when that's where the word erotic comes from, but we're totally attracted to someone physically.
Yeah.
So So it's just like this. You can hear a teenage girl saying, "He's so hot," or the guy saying that. Okay, so there's eros, and it's got to do with physical desire and just being
Hmm.
physically attracted to someone, and that's great. There's no problem with that at all. But then there's another kind of love, and that's philos. This is the next kind of sort of, we're going in concentric circles here, and the philos, this next circle in, is about friendship. And so it's slightly conditional in a sense that you're into the same things, you're totally into the same things, and you think that person is really physically attractive. So do you enter into a deeper, even sexual relationship? As the teenagers are asking, and my answer, if I'm talking to 1,000 teenagers, is no. Because if you enter into a sexual relationship, a deeper, intimate relationship with someone because they're hot, you're physically attracted to them, and you're really into the same things, what happens if you start getting into some other kind of music form or
Hmm.
some other kind of interest? Then the basis of your relationship is really shaken, because you went into it because you were friends, into the same things, and attracted to each other. And some people, as you know more than most, Jason, actually get married on that
Oh
basis.
yeah.
I was just doing a workshop a couple of weeks ago, and one mother was visibly moved. And I checked in with her at break, and it happens a lot, and so I wanted to really just check in with her. And she said, I've just recently divorced, because, and I didn't know until this language that we're talking about right now, this picture, is that's what I went into. And, and my husband kept interested in this. They were into outdoor activities, right? He kept really dynamically interested in that. But when we had a family, my interest went into being a mother, and he kind of got resentful because outdoor activities, mountain climbing and stuff, takes a ton of time, and he wasn't willing to give up that time.
Yeah.
And I was, because we had children, and my interests shifted from mountaineering and outdoor activities into being a mother, and his didn't,
Hmm.
right? And there was kids involved.
Yeah.
Then the third kind of love, this next one in, is caritas. It's what Lewis called caritas, which is charity, doing something for someone and not expecting anything back at all. It's a beautiful kind of love. There's friendship love, but then there's this charity love of
Yeah.
doing something for someone just because you want to help them out,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And then there's the fourth kind of love, and Lewis called that agape, which is this love of someone's spirit, destiny, karma. I don't know how, it's hard to put words to it, but you sense the life gesture of someone, and you do anything to help them achieve that. Now, I've spoken to, literally I have spoken to thousands of teenagers, because I always get invited to schools to talk about sex, drugs, and actually never rock and roll, come to think of it. And I don't want to talk about sex. I want to talk about these four kinds of love. And when an intimate relationship begins, are you at do you have that fourfoldness in place? And to wait, to really wait until you do. And then that's not then preaching abstinence. In fact, what it's doing is giving kids a picture, rather than abstinence, of depthfulness.
Yeah.
Again, a longer answer to a great question.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. Kim, this has been a real treat, man. I just so respect what you're doing out there. Thanks for helping all of us
Likewise.
parents and kids. And where can people find out about you and your books and what you're up to?
Oh, it's just at simplicityparenting.com. And right there, if a parent wanted to be like a grassroots leader, group leader, coach, we have this simple little training. Well, it'd be ironic if it was complicated, right? But we have this simple little training to become, and that's for me what I'm passionate about, is having our coaches go out into the world and just meet with 5 or 10 people, I mean, have them in your home, have them in a church hall, have these groups wherever you can to help parents sense that there's others out there in the community that also want to give children a childhood. And you can train to be a facilitator of that in a very simple, quick way. And that's all at simplicityparenting.com. That's where you'll find a ton of information around this.
Okay, excellent. Cool. We'll include all of that in the show notes. Kim, thank you so much again. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you and connecting.
Got to do it again sometime.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
There you have it, Mr. Kim John Payne on simplicity parenting and discipline. Really, really good stuff there for me. I feel like I learned a lot and taken stuff away from my own parenting journey. Okay, if you want to follow up with Kim, do that. I'm going to give you his info, and then we'll talk about your action step for the day. So first, go to simplicityparenting.com. All right, and also check out our show notes. We included some links in there. Here's your action step. Stop seeing your kid as disobedient, and stop labeling your kid as disobedient from here on out. And take on the reframe that your kid is disoriented. They're disoriented. And they're asking for you to hold the limits and the line and to gather them. All right? And if you want a deeper dive on this, because it's a little complex for you, then get Kim's books. They're easy to read and understand. And there's some really great applications, practical applications in those books for you. Okay? So we're going to move from labeling kids as disobedient, and we're going to start labeling them as disoriented. And if we even apply that to the most intensive kids, like this high school shootings, we could say that those kids are disoriented, not disobedient. Well, obviously they're disobedient. They're disobeying laws, basic laws, yes. But where does that come from? Okay, let's try it on that they're disoriented. And there's more we as parents could do to examine ourselves and look in the mirror and help our children. Every time I've gotten stuck with my kids, every single time, I assume I might be a problem, that it's possible it's me. And I look in the mirror and I try to figure out what the issue is that's getting triggered in me, and I go deal with it. So please be that kind of parent, all right? Please face your own stuff. Otherwise, you're going to pass it on essentially to your children. And it's a tall order, I know, but you signed up for parenting. You signed up to be a parent. So then meet that responsibility, all right? You can do this. And if you need extra support, guys, join the Relationship School Roots community, relationshipschool.net/roots. All right, every couple of weeks you can ask questions and get support from the community. And you can also do partner practice calls with other folks in the community. It's really powerful, and I encourage you to get in there now. All right, relationshipschool.net/roots, just like roots of the tree. All right. Alrighty then. Thanks, Kim John Payne. Thanks, folks, for listening. Thanks, non-parents, for listening. Perhaps you learned something here that you can apply in your own life, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. Here's to a beautiful relationship connection today.